and a warm welcome to you on this Thursday afternoon, the 15th of April, if I'm not mistaken. I think last time we met was in the middle of November last year, so it is really great to be back. It's been a few months. Perhaps just while people are busy settling in, I can tell you that we are joined this afternoon by about 50 healthcare providers from a variety of different disciplines, which includes physiotherapists, chiropractors, occupational therapists, psychologists, and there's even some medical orthotists and prosthetists. I'm absolutely convinced that this will be a very informative session, as we will be talking about the claims assistance that you can expect from Genoa, what to do when you receive a complaint, how to report an incident, and what to report, which is also very important. I think one of the most sort of comforting things when you are faced with a claim or a medical query is just to have an ear on the other side of the phone and to have Genoa's experienced in-house advisors to take your hand and guide you through that claims process. So both of our two guest speakers are advisors with Genoa, and I would like to start by introducing Dr. Brad Byra. He's a very familiar face to you all. Now, Brad, as you know, is a chiropractor. He's also an author of many a medical journal, and he's a medico-legal expert. So, Brad, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Lani. Always so nice to be back. Happy Thursday to everyone, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Great. Also joining us today is Jacqueline Smith. Now, she's a claims executive, and she's got several years of experience in the med-mal litigation arena. So, Jackie, a warm welcome to you, and I think it's not going to be the last time that we see your face on this malpractice insurance webinars.
Thanks, Lani. Thanks so much.
Excellent. For those that don't know me, my name is Lani Ace, and I'm a product manager with the SpaceNet Global Group and with ProfNet. And as you might know, ProfNet partnered with Genoa, with Shackleton Risk Management and Sapphire, who have created a range of new medical professional indemnity policies. And it's my great privilege to be your host today. For those of you who've had to deal with Genoa advisors, I'm sure you will know that they respond on the same day and that they really hold your hand through any claims process. But before I'm going to ask Jackie to tell us about this process, attendees, please remember that if you've got any burning questions, you can use the chat functionality, and I'm sure between our guest speakers, we're going to try and assist those and try and answer your questions. But for the moment, I think we've got the majority of people who have joined us this afternoon. Jackie, over to you, please.
Thanks so much. Well, everyone, I just want to say that I enjoy these feedback sessions so much as well. They're invaluable to us because they allow us to obviously increase our performance in the claims area and to improve our service. So at the same time, it also instills confidence in you so that you know that you've got someone at the other end of the phone to deal with your complaint or claim that has been made against you. So I thought we could first just chat briefly about the stigma that gets attached to reporting of claims. You know, a lot of people don't want to report small claims. They'd rather report the larger ones because they feel if they report too many claims that, you know, there's connotation that goes with that perhaps, you know, you're clinically underperforming or you're providing inadequate service. So we just want to assure you that that's not the case at all. At Genoa, we don't judge the claim or the allegation. We see it for what it is. It's not our first rodeo, okay? We understand that patients would be confused, angry at the time of writing a complaint, and so we've seen it all before. Brad, I think let's just move on to this first slide so we can just really talk about your fellow practitioners. They've all had a claim at some stage. So just because they don't chat about it doesn't mean that they haven't experienced one themselves. Okay. As I said earlier, it isn't an indication of poor clinical performance. It can also be born out of a misunderstanding. Some of them are even by design. We know all too well that these complaints can be vexatious at times. They can be caused to hurt you, annoy you, frustrate you, and possibly even harass you. So just relax and know that at least one of your colleagues that you know very closely have reported a claim to Genoa already. All right. So let's just also chat about how, sorry, let's just go back there. So no matter how senior or junior you are, complaints are very normal and they can knock your confidence. A seasoned practitioner, for example, may not necessarily be that offended by a billing complaint, whereas a junior practitioner may really be offended by that and see that as being the end of their career, you know, overcharging. So I think as well, a seasoned practitioner might be more offended by an allegation of a misdiagnosis, for example. So claims hit us in different places all the time. And it's up to Genoa to lead you through that and show you how to respond to those claims. All right, let's talk about claims notification clauses. These notification clauses are in most insurance policies. They can be anything from 7 to 30 days, 30 days being the maximum. At Genoa, we have a 30-day claim notification clause. What this really means is that you have 30 days to tell us about an event which may give rise to a claim or an actual claim. So we'll go into a little bit later about what a circumstance means and what a claim means. But for now, I think that the three important clauses when considering your insurance policy, which we hope you would have read once or at least twice before making a claim, are that you have a joining date when you join Genoa. So it's always a good idea to see when that joining date is so that you know which insurer you are reporting a claim to. Next, you'd need to be aware of what is excluded under a claims policy. There are a list of exclusions which you can go and find in the policy wording. I mean, you don't want to be reporting the fact that your employee had their fingers in the till if the policy is really for reporting medical malpractice insurance. Okay. And then lastly, the deductible, which is an excess which applies to any particular claim that you lodge. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a 30-day notification clause, and let's just talk briefly about what a circumstance means. I just want to stop share for a minute. Lani, you might have to step in here. All right. Anyway, let's just focus on this. So a circumstance would be...
Jackie,
yeah.
Sorry if I could interrupt you. We actually can't see your screen. If you're sharing, we can see you.
I don't think you started your screen share.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let's do that. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Let's just go back to that. We were saying you are not alone and that just because your fellow practitioners don't talk about claims doesn't mean that they don't have any.
Let's just pause there for a second, Jackie, if you don't mind. Are you trying to share your screen, the presentation?
I am. Is it coming through now? Sorry about that technical.
Now we can see it. Now we can see it.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that glitch. So yes.
Recap quickly so we can see receiving a complaint.
Okay. So you're not alone, and just because your fellow practitioners don't talk about claims doesn't mean that they don't have any. So it's not an indication of poor clinical performance. It can be born out of a number of things, as we said, misunderstandings or by design.
Jackie,
okay. Yes.
Before you go on, if we go back to that last slide, I think what's important as we share is when we talk about born out of misunderstandings or design, there are patients who make a decision that they're going to take action against you regardless of who you are. And when we first started looking at this years back, we looked at some American studies that showed that by far, as close as half the claims that were made against practitioners were made by people who decided that they were going to take action against them before they'd even had the consultation. So there's a tremendous sense, and I know this from my practice when I see patients. Every time I see a patient now, I'm thinking in the back of my head, am I going to get a complaint? Every time the phone rings and it's an unknown number, I'm kind of anxious. I'm wondering, is this somebody asking for my records? It's a normal thing to happen in our world. When I started in the 90s, people didn't sue you for stuff unless you'd really been bad, unless you'd not apologize, unless you hadn't made an effort, unless you'd done some significant harm. That's changed now. So to recognize in your world, sometimes people fight their personal battles with you, and you become the sharp edge of their sword. So Jackie, I wanted to share that because design is not our design as practitioners, but it's often the circumstance of who's come to see us.
Brad, back in the
Absolutely.
90s, I mean, I was also still in clinical practice then. Obviously, I don't think a lot of people had access to malpractice insurance. It wasn't such a big thing. But I think now the general public is so aware that healthcare providers needs to have insurance. And like you rightly said, they actually make up their mind that they're going to sue you before they step into your practice because they know you've got access to insurance money.
Correct. And so when we look at professional indemnity, we look at it as a way of making sure that we're transferring our risk of needing to pay a settlement. But some people look at that as a way of ensuring that they get their credit card debt paid or some of the other debts paid. And they look at us, and that's why I don't like the term malpractice insurance, because I don't believe we do malpractice. Sometimes there's negligence, and sometimes there's errors, and sometimes there's a complication that we didn't speak out well. But it doesn't make us doing into bad practitioners. We're not doing malpractice.
Correct.
Sorry, Jackie, we were interrupting you.
No, not at all. Go for it. So I just thought we could just deal with the distinction between a circumstance, for example, and a claim, because often this, becomes an issue, and practitioners aren't quite sure when they need to let us know about events. So a circumstance would be, a thought that something's gone wrong, and I'm going to go into some examples of these as well, a hint, possibly a suspicion or threat, and it hasn't actually materialized into receiving a summons yet where the person's taken the decision to sue. So a hint, for example, would be like where, let's take an example of a speech therapist who
Do you need to go to your next slide?
No, I don't.
Okay, sorry.
A speech therapist who, for example, sees a patient in a ward and just decides to take a clinical history of the medication that the patient has been taking to date. And she accidentally writes this, instead of writing it on a scrap piece of paper for her own records, she writes it on the prescription chart. Whilst leaving the hospital, she realizes on her way to Stanton, oh shucks, I've written the patient's medication down on the incorrect form or the incorrect medium, and I need to turn back. And now she realizes it's nearly 5 o'clock, and this may not be in time for the nurse's round of medication at 5 o'clock. And so that would be an example of a thought of something's gone that could go wrong. Okay. A hint might be where a fellow practitioner, for example, says, look, I've had the patient come and see me. They have indicated that they're not happy with your services. Just FYI. A suspicion might be, for example, where a practitioner sees a patient, they come to you with a battery of conditions or symptoms, and you're not quite sure what is actually going on with the patient, and so you suspect when they leave that you might have missed something. It's a good idea to inform Genoa. A threat could be, for example, where a patient catches you in the corridor and says, my friend is a nurse at the hospital and knows very well that this lump was not benign and you should have looked at it closer, and I'm going to sue you. So those kind of things would be circumstances that need to be notified to Genoa. A claim, on the other hand, as we've said, is either a physical demand or a summons where a claim has been made against you by a claimant, a third party, and they are seeking some sort of compensation from you. Right, let's go on to the next slide. So in all insurance policies, you are going to have a claim notification clause. As I mentioned earlier, they can be anything from 7 days to 30 days. Genoa has a 30-day claim notification clause. So this means, as we discussed, that you would need to, in 30 days, advise us of an event, which we just said was a circumstance, which could give rise to a claim in the future or an actual claim, and you have 30 days for both of those. Obviously the earlier is the one you're going to report. And then there are 3 important clauses which you need to take note of in your policy wording or your policy schedule, and those would be when your cover incepted with Genoa, so that you know which insurer you're reporting the matter to, what exclusions might apply, okay, and your excess that is applicable in the event of a claim. I wanted to just mention as well that the reason why we ask you to report a claim within 30 days is because a failure to report a complaint or claim within 30 days might prejudice the insurer. as we know, claims stack up very quickly. So for example, what might be a capital sum claimed in a summons now, if you leave it too long and defense isn't attended to, that could result in years of interest and costs that need to be paid to that claimant. So the idea is to get onto the defense as soon as possible to cauterize the costs in the long run. Okay, it might also be that you haven't received an actual summons yet, and it just requires a consultation with the patient to smooth things over, which if you attend to urgently and you let your knower know about it urgently, that can be avoided so that, you know, costs don't climb, or so that you even, you know, avoid a claim altogether down the line. So failure to report a claim may also invalidate your claim. So that's also important to remember. So 30 days is the key here. Brad, I hand over to you about keeping calm with a claim.
I'm going to address that now, but Jackie, there is a question that's come through. Am I not covered if I fail to report the incident within 30 days?
So the answer to that is it's two-pronged, okay? Yes and no. No, because it is an indication of a date. It is quite restrictive. We obviously have reinsurers that we have to notify your claims to. Every insurer is reinsured, that is backed up by insurance by another company, and so they are quite strict as well with Genoa as to how long we take to notify them of claims. So it is important from that aspect for good claims management to keep within those guidelines. However, if there isn't prejudice to the insurer, for example, if it was over Christmas, that's always a good example where, you know, a summons was served on your rooms and you just weren't there until the 7th of January and 30 days have expired. You know, it's not the end of the world, provided that it is done within the nearest possible time thereafter. And as I say, provided there's been no prejudice to the insurer. So prejudice really comes in, for example, where you deny us the ability to assist with the defense. In other words, a delay in reporting a claim might also result in a judgment being taken against you because you didn't enter an appearance to defend the summons. This is why it's so important for attorneys to get cracking with your defense as soon as possible to avoid a judgment, because then the insurer might be in for the full amount of a claim, even though you are not necessarily found negligent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to unpack that a little bit more, and it's part of this keep calm and cool Genoa piece. So I don't know if you can see me as well as the screen. And Lonnie, I check with yourself, and sometimes it's nicer when you can't see me. I've got one of those faces for radio as opposed to video. But my experience is this, and my experience is limited to only 26 years in clinical practice and 17 years of doing this, is that the likelihood that you won't notify the insurer when you get a formal complaint or a letter from the attorneys or a summons is very, very, very small, because the first thing that happens is you have a near heart attack. And once you've had your heart attack, and if you've recovered from your heart attack and you're sitting there with the papers, the first thing that happens is you get this real sense of dread and fear and anger and anxiety. And the first thing you do is, who must I call? When must I call? And how must I call? So the experience has been that people who get a letter or who get a formal complaint from an attorney don't generally wait 30 days, because you get it and the first thing you think of is, oh, hell, I've got something. I better do something about this. It's not like a electricity bill that, well, if I get it, it doesn't really matter, or my toll road stuff. You know, you get your toll road bill, you don't really pay attention, doesn't really matter. You get your summons from an attorney as it relates to patient Brad Byra, and your blood goes cold. So I think it's unlikely that you're going to miss notifying the insurer that you have a claim. And often you don't know what a circumstance is. You don't know that you've done something that somebody's taking an exception to until you get a result. So I would bear that in mind. And if you've got more questions, we'll answer that. The reason that we've got this slide up of controlling your emotions is that you can, when you're stressed, not think as well as you might. And when you're not thinking as well as you might do, your ability not only to be a safe practitioner, but also a good spouse and also a generally healthy person significantly goes down. And you start going into a stress response. When you're feeling stressed, it's hard to stay focused. You move from your executive front part of your brain into your more cause and response and less good emotional side of your brain. Then it's very, very hard to give good response. And those of you that have ever driven in the traffic and somebody's cut in front of you and your adrenaline gets up, you can't think of a good response until you go home. And then while you're at home lying in bed, you think, oh, I should have said that. And it's kind of the same thing when you get a claim come through against you. And you'll see Dion has just said, if you're not sure, give ProfNet a call. And if there's a claim issue, give the Genoa 24/7 medico legal line a call. Send a mail, reach out for help early. The earlier you do, the less your stress levels sit and permeate. Hey, Jackie, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yes, absolutely. We have a number of policyholders and members that phone us with absolutely no idea where to start. They're extremely grateful for our help. We get going with things immediately. I haven't seen anybody yet that doesn't let me know within 3 days of receiving something that they've had a claim. They normally, as you say, are generally quite disturbed by it. It might be a case of them having worked night shift or not been at the office for that day, and that's how they've missed it. But generally, they're onto it as soon as their emails open in the morning and they're looking for help. So what we do at Genoa is we actually call you as well as respond to your email just to let you know that your email has been received. It's always nice to chat to someone as well because you might have additional questions and you might just be feeling like you need a bit of tender loving care because you're feeling at your worst.
Jackie, if I may just interrupt you there for a second. If people attending just focus on the chat functionality for a second, we've posted quite a few options in there for you. There's the ProfNet email address, as well as the Genoa 24/7 helpline and the options that you need to follow. There's also an email address for Genoa, claims@genoa.co.za. So if any of you want to copy those, paste it somewhere, save it, make sure that that is your go-to when you're in trouble or when you suspect that there's something wrong.
Yes, correct. And there will be prompts on that number as well that will say if you want to speak to a lawyer, press 1. If you want to speak to a medical legal advisor, press 2, and so on and so on. So it's a very easy number to dial and follow. You'll get assistance. And we normally respond to your emails and your calls within the same day. Well, actually, we can guarantee you that we do. So no problems there.
If people don't have access to the chat functionality, I'm just going to read that number out for you. It is, it's 010-286-1915. 010-286-1915. Thanks, Jackie.
So if I may, Jackie, just before you go into claims notification, Dion asked the question, in the case of a potential claim, these are not always the adrenaline situations. Well, I tend to think that when a person gets a note that says, we act on behalf of so-and-so in a matter as it relates to so-and-so, at that point, there's a degree of a cascade of emotions that goes through the person. And a lot of that, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about the stages of managing grief and loss, of denial and challenging and bargaining and anger before you get to acceptance. And guess what? When you get a claim like that, or you get a notice that's like a call to action against you, the first thing you do is this is wrong. This didn't happen to me. And then it's anger. Who do they think they are? And at that point, there's a little bit of fear, panic, anxiety that kicks in. I don't know what to do. I've never done this before. Did I do something wrong? Will I lose my house, my car, my spouse, my dog? And it then becomes quite meaningful. So the event could have been day past, week past, month past, or long past. But I think when you get that note or you get that letter, calling your friend, whoever you decide your friend is that you want to make your first call to, should be your first step. Then once that's been done and you've been spoken off the ledge and you've calmed down a little bit, and calm down sometimes takes 3 or 4 calls. Jackie and I have tag teamed a couple of times where we've had multiple calls with a person. One of us playing reasonable cop and one of us playing absolutely calm cop. And there's been times, as an example, where the person has said to me, wow, Jackie's really tough. Listen to what she wants to do. And I always say, listen, Jackie's gentle. This is what I would do. And then they say, wow, I'm going to stay with Jackie. She's calmer. So sometimes having the perspective is really important. And Jackie, I think this is a good segue into your claims notification journey.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to just mention as well that, you know, with the HPCSA and AHPCSA, they are obviously duty bound to investigate these claims. So try not to take too much offense to the fact that you've been served with a complaint. You have to just walk the road. You know, they've got to investigate the matter. They owe this much to the public. And so being infuriated and having off a response on your own the same day is not going to do you any favors. It's always best to be very measured in your response and to look at the complaints, perhaps read it, you know, once, twice, thrice if you have to, and then contact Genoa and let's look at it together and see what is actually being, you know, alleged here. What is the claimant seeking at the end of this? What is the outcome? What is the relief? Because in having off a response, you may end up defaming the patient as well, and then, you know, you've got to worry about whether or not there's cover for that, which, you know, Genoa, the policy is obviously a defense policy, not a policy that now pays for you to go and instigate claims. So you just got to be mindful of how you behave when it comes to a claim. It's always best to demonstrate calm, compassionate, and helpful demeanor. At the end of the day, the HPCSA is your regulatory body, and so you've got to also consider how you are perceived as well by the body. So we talked about earlier, you know, complaints and claims. Complaints, if they are minor, they may, the HPCSA may require you to file your response in 10 days if it's a minor transgression. If it's a major transgression, they normally give you 2 to 3 months to furnish them with your response. So it's up to you. If you spend the first 3 days of those 10 days in bed crying over the complaint, then you're only going to have 7 days left to contact Genoa, dig out your records, consult with everybody that you may need to if you were part of a larger treatment team and you perhaps not the only one involved in this case. And you would also need to put together a response, which we're going to chat about now, a claims notification, where you're going to have to give us some detail. So don't leave it late. The more detail we can get at the earlier stage, the better for Genoa.
I wonder whether I could do this, do that. Please feel free to join the mentorship session next Friday and ask your questions. I'm happy to support you, to help you figure out.
I'm battling to hear that.
Yeah, no, I think, Enver, perhaps you can just mute whoever was speaking there.
I have done so. I think it was not in connection with your presentation, Jax.
Okay. No. Okay. Wonderful. So I've just put together a very simple example. And before you read this and get distracted, let's just talk about basics. You want to give Genoa some sort of timeline. It's always best to put your facts in a chronological order so that the reader's not left asking additional questions and wasting time. As I say, if you've got 10 days to file a response, you want to be able to give Genoa as much information as possible. So my simple example would be, I wish to advise you of an event which took place on Saturday, 12 May 2021 in my rooms at 12. There's your time. So now no questions are asked as to when did this happen, okay. Next one. Patient came in complaining of lower back pain following a fall he'd sustained earlier this week. There are the symptoms. I recommended performing a spinal adjustment to rectify his posture and reduce inflammation. Due to his size and location of the injury, I recommended the short lever arm thrust. He had to lie on his right side for this. There you're telling us about the treatment that you performed. Whilst performing the manipulation, I heard a cracking sound. He held onto his chest and cried out with pain. And there we know what happened, the event that took place. Remember, we discussed as well earlier that it could just be an event, a hint, suspicion. He cried out with pain. At this point, you're not sure now if this is going to materialize in a claim, or it could be the actual error in omission where you document in your notes, I heard a crack and I think it was because of X. I stopped treatment immediately and sent him for x-rays. This would be the remedial action that you did. And x-rays came back showing a suggestion of a fracture. There's your keyword, suggestion of a fracture. He is now claiming that I pay all his medical bills. That is the complaint. So that is just a basic template to follow, and we can obviously provide you with that should you require it. Again, it's just a guideline. It's not exhaustive.
Jackie, before you go on.
Sure.
Sadly, I sometimes get asked to give an opinion on a circumstance like this. And what happens is the report that the patient writes or that the patient gives goes to their attorney. And that's the grounds for this whole action to happen. Then what happens is you say to Jackie or to me, actually, I did this A, B, C, D, and it looked like this. And you give us your side of the story. You need to make sure that your clinical records match your story. Because at the end of the day, there's a small thing called the National Health Act. And there's the small section called Section 6 and another one called Section 7. And then there's your registration requirements in terms of the ethical guidelines booklets that say you have to keep contemporaneous and detailed records. If your records are absent and they don't match what you say in your example, it's going to be very, very difficult to defend you. So you need to make sure that what you say that we are planning to defend you with match the records that you've got. We have circumstances sometimes where the person says, here's my records, and they're largely empty with some annotations which sometimes are not really legible. And then there's a notation that says, oh, actually what I did was this and this and this, and that and that and that, and this and this and this. And then the defense, the plaintiff attorney, the one representing the patient, says, prove that that's actually what you wrote. Show us your records. And if you say no, they do what's called a Section 35(3) request through the courts to force you to give everything. If you don't have anything to give that supports this example of whatever the example is that Jackie's asking you to do, it's very difficult. So you may be able to write this if you do good records. You may, on the other hand, be chatting to Jackie and say, actually, I did this, but I don't have the records. This is my recollection. And then there's a different journey to go down. So I'm saying this to you because we can't stress enough how important your records are. There's a recent judgment that, yes, Lonnie?
No, continue first.
There's a recent judgment where the argument that came out was, if it's not in the records, you didn't do it. It's the cold fact of the record that counts. So at the end of the day, the patient says, you did this, you say, I did that, and your record is the only supporting evidence that you've got to say that you did to demonstrate that you did what you said. Sorry, Lonnie, you were going to ask something?
What I was just going to add to that, you also can't add notes to a record after the fact or amend certain sections in your record.
Correct.
And I think it's nearly impossible doing that in an electronic health record, which we know you can very, very easily do in a practice management application like EasyMed. Whereas if you do written notes, you know, it's easier to squeeze something in, but it's also fairly easy to see afterwards that there's been a section that was added or you wrote it with a different pen. And there's numerous examples there. But don't go and change your records after a claim is sort of produced against you.
Yes, correct. At any stage of the matter, those records can be subpoenaed. You often get what initiates a complaint as a request for medical records, where the attorney will get a consent form from their client to request those records on behalf of the client, and that will get sent through to the practitioner, and he basically needs to provide those records. So it is, again, very, very important that things are not added at the end. All right, Brad, I'll hand over to you for preparing the short statement.
Yeah, we're talking about this a little bit, but really one of the challenges when we go through and we study is we're taught how to keep a case history. We're taught how to do a physical exam. We're taught how to reach an opinion. We're taught how to accept a referral. We're taught how to do a referral to a practitioner. And when you prepare a short statement, it's very much the same thing. You're writing as if you're writing to another medical professional referring the case. So what you need to be able to say is, this is what happened, using the example of what you saw in the previous slide and what Jackie's described. What you also have to make sure of is, do you have all the source documents? The thing about an electronic record, which is a good and sometimes a less good thing, is it's got a date and time stamp on it. Last amended on X date. Sometimes what happens is you haven't done your record for 2 or 3 days. So the consultation is on the 12th of April, and it says at the bottom, record amended or record finalized on the 15th. I said, well, how do you remember what you did 3 days before the record? So review the records that you've got, review your billing records and your coding. If you're using WhatsApp, and hopefully if you are, you're using business WhatsApp and not social WhatsApp, look at your diary, look at your call logs, and make sure that you're including who you spoke to when. And the reason both Jackie and I have recently reviewed things like this is sometimes the patient or the patient's parents, if this is a minor patient, correspond with you on WhatsApp. And they make statements with you on WhatsApp, or they make statements with you on your email. And the order, the chronological order that you see as point 3 is really important to set up the sequence of events. Then if there's any other people involved, any practitioners involved, if you're using your practice management system like EasyMed, add those comments, add as much as you can so that we understand what's going on. Because what happens is we can't give you good advice if you don't tell us the whole story. And it's the same as when you see a patient. And if you see a patient, regardless of what your discipline is, the first thing you do when you see the patient is treat them, right? Oh, no, wait, it's not. The first thing you do is you speak to them, and you ask them questions, and you say, hey, what went on? How did this happen? What's going on in your mind? What does it feel like? What makes it better? What makes it worse? What's the nature and texture of what you're experiencing? And your short statement needs to be written in the same way. Now, the way that you do this then is important, because there's a degree of jargon or clinical or professional specific information and the linguistics that you need to use. But at the same time, be as clear and simple and obvious as you need to be, because often the people adjudicating your records are not medical practitioners. Sometimes they're not even a practitioner in your discipline. Sometimes they're a person who is legally trained or paralegally trained, and these are the people who are going through the assessments first. If you're unintelligible because you've tried to write a medical journal entry into what the experience was, you either seem too remote or too academic, or you seem to be pontificating, then it's very difficult for somebody to make sense. So keep it simple. With it, we were always taught when we wrote reports to use the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, make it easy. Preferably when you prepare the statement and you've got your story, and you can write it in longhand, and you can write it with little circles and annotations, and you can use abbreviations, but when you're ready to submit it, it needs to be typed and it needs to be legible. And legible is not only I can read the typing, but it also has to be intelligible. You need to use sentences. They need to have commas. They need to have full stops. You need to practice this, because we can only support you on what you give us. And if you give us something that we can't use, it's very difficult. And then the question is, if you are going to prepare your statement, get out all of your documents. So say, for example, on my patient intake form, when Brad came to see me, the patient intake form has his demographics and it has his consent, blah, 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 and everything that's there. And here's the copy of the form, Annexure A. Then I did the following tests, and I used the following pain rating scale or anxiety rating scale or dysfunction rating scale, which is the universal scale. And here's Brad's responses of B, and here's my record relating to that consultation of C. So that by the time you finish doing that, you've pulled out the records in sequential order, you've got all of your tests, all of your contributing information, any imaging that you did, if you did imaging, any machinery that you used, any medical device readings that you used. They're all there, and they follow in an order that somebody reading a story would understand it. So your statement needs to have an introduction, well, preferably an executive summary, a 3 or 4 line summary of your experience. Then it's got an introduction, then it's got a body in 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then it's got a conclusion. In the short statement, if you've written more than a page, you've overwritten. Hey, Jackie, what do you think?
Absolutely. I can't stress enough about how when facts change, opinions change. So the more facts you can give us, the better the outcome for you. I can't tell you how many people we've assisted where they give us information and the complaint response starts looking quite bad in the beginning, and then we say, do you have anything else? And they say, oh, well, everything's on WhatsApp. I disclosed the fees about my billing procedures. And they say, oh, am I supposed to send that? And there's the big gap in the correspondence. And by the time you're done with printing out all the WhatsApps and the diary logs from companies that assist practitioners with their practice management, you're able to put together a really nice consolidated response that deals with everything. And it absolutely changes things and can turn the situation around 180 degrees.
True story. And you may not need it, but you have it. You don't want to scramble to put this together when you've got a deadline. And some people do. Some people wait until 5 o'clock on the day before and then they do it. And then we get it and we say, well, hang on a second, this is great. But actually we need blah, 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 blah. And now it's 3 in the morning and somebody's burning the house down because they can't find what they need.
Yes. We have in some instances as well had practitioners who decide to do their own responses, and in some cases they've used exclamation marks because they're very angry about some of the allegations that are made in the complaint. That's never advisable, and I can tell you from experience that in a lot of those cases what has come after that has not been easy to resolve because of that kind of language. All right, I think we've covered everything with regards to preparing a short statement. Let's chat briefly about what we need from policyholders and members. We do need some focus because, as I said, it is you'll be going through quite a lot at the time. You'll be feeling very vulnerable and you might not want to focus on the matter, but we have to walk the road. So we are going to need your assistance. In as much as we're going to take a lot of that pressure off you and help you, I would say 70% of the way, we are going to need 30% input from you, where Brad chatted about earlier with providing the documents. We also need to be mindful of the time constraints that apply to claims and complaints, and we need your commitment to finding us the information and the documentation in order to put forward the best response for you. All right, I think that on the yes, we want to go through the actual complaint. So for many of you who haven't actually seen what an HPCSA complaint form looks like, if you've been fortunate enough not to have received one of those yourself, then I can tell you that it's roughly 4 pages. On the first page, it will have the patient's information, and it will have the practitioner's information as well as the HPCSA number. On the second and third pages, you will have to detail what the complaint is, what is being levied against you. And then on the last page, there'll be a block there where it says what does the patient seek from this? What is the outcome that they want? So a lot of the time, these complaints, when you read them, they consist of a story of how things went terribly wrong from beginning to end. And when you look at the actual relief that they're seeking, it's something that's even unachievable, or it's something so far-fetched that they're never going to even get it. So now the dilemma comes in, what do you actually respond to? Because we ideally want to focus on the key issues that have been raised against you. But if the whole complaint is about certain things, we need to start sifting what is important here, what constitutes a complaint. So we need to go through the complaint very carefully and try and single out the issues that need addressing. it's good to digest everything and read the complaint twice and then speak to Genoa and get their opinion on the matter. So together we always try and understand exactly what the patient is complaining about. So we try and see, is it your attitude? Is it a diagnosis issue? Is it a clinical error? Is it actually malpractice? Is it alleged malpractice? Or is it something else like your bedside manner or the fact that you threw a patient's box of cigarettes away because you don't approve of smoking? So it can be a number of things. It's also important to have a look at who is making the complaint, because if it's someone other than the patient, it may be a basis for taking a technical point that that person doesn't have what we call in law locus standi to make the complaint against you. All right, Brad, I will hand over to you for keeping calm, how to keep our practitioners calm.
I have no idea.
Oh, yes, you do. You do it all day long.
Yeah, so we've spoken about this initial response and the preparation that you need to do. And I think that's important, because when we look at a complaint, the first thing we do is we deny it and then we get mad. So one of the things that you can't do is do trial by correspondence. And so suddenly what happens is I write to you, you write to me, I write back, you write back, and the things just escalate and escalate and escalate. So the idea when these kind of things happen is to say, right, I'm going to work this through from beginning to end. And we say this, but it takes time. It takes time to measure this. So Jackie spoke earlier about what needs to go on your short response or your short piece of information that you're sending through. Once that happens, it'll be either Jackie or myself or a combination of us saying to you, what do you need to do next? Can you take the emotion out of this for a moment and try and be as objective as possible? Yes, you hurt, and yes, you're miserable. Okay, now what do we do about that? Who can you lean on? And find somebody who becomes your mentor, your partner, your friend, who you lean on now, before a crisis happens. I'm not saying you should will a crisis to happen, but if a crisis were to happen, who would the first call be in terms of your network? Who would you reach out to say, you know what, Lani, Jackie, I've had this really bad thing. I'm really stressed right now. I'm anxious. I need you to talk me off my own ledge. And before you've had that call, do nothing. First, go and look over the ledge and see that you're on a ledge. Then work through. Then breathe. Then breathe again. And in doing that, find somebody who you can lean on and try really hard not to be either too reactive